Story time. Before I jump into things, I want to tell you a story from one of my favorite shows growing up called Hunter x Hunter. If you have not seen the show before and you plan to, here's your disclaimer to skip to the beginning of this video where I just jump into the board games. The story starts with the world being taken over by an alien civilization that is both physically and intellectually superior than the human race. At the helm of this sits a king who is the most intellectually and most physically strong of everyone else under him, by far. It's not even close. While his lackeys spend their entire time rounding up different people and animals, slaughtering them, or using them to set the stage for their takeover, he spends all of his time gathering the wisest minds in the world and dueling them over various different board games, basically testing their intellectual abilities. And these players would stake their lives to play with him. One day, he meets a frail and helpless girl that continually beats him at chess. And he's flabbergasted by this. He continues to play her and continues to lose. He becomes so incredibly frustrated by this that over time, he builds a deep-seated urge to kill this girl. As he walks over to where she is being kept to do the deed, he notices that she's being attacked by crows and is unable to defend herself. Against his initial desires, he jumps in and saves her from those crows, and from that point onward, he continually protects her and continually plays games with her. And over time, through sparring over many games of chess, he gained a completely unfamiliar sense of empathy. He learned to appreciate the strength that even someone so weak as herself could possess. Once humans took back control of the world, and he was on his deathbed, he wanted nothing more than to spend the rest of his days playing chess with this girl, not even against her will. She also deeply enjoyed playing games with him at this point, and he was never able to beat her at chess. There is a level of closeness that I'm unable to explain that board games foster, and I think the intellectually sparring between two or more people over extended periods of time or over multiple sessions encourages a sense of mutual respect and understanding. That's the closest I can kind of get to describing it, but it's much more nuanced than that. And this story, this feeling, and having recently acquired 2 board games that I'm really excited about, inspired me to make this video about 3 board games that I think anybody should try. At the end of the video, I'm also going to add a bonus tip that can help you or anybody else elevate your experience while playing board games. Let's get started. Alrighty, let's talk board games. So I'm going to give each of these games a complexity rating. That does not have to do with how good the game is or how strategic the game is, but merely how hard the game is to learn. Some of these games are just very easy to learn and can become very, very hard to master. So without further ado, let's get started. So the first game is a 2 to 5 player tile laying game called Carcassonne. So how this game is played, it's pretty simple. Basically, players around the table take turns drawing tiles, and they place tiles to an ever-growing map. In addition, they optionally place one of their units on the map, and these units will score victory points at the end of the game, depending on different rules around specific land masses and attributes on that map. There are 2 expansions that are included in the box, the River and Abyss expansion, but this game expands with 11 different expansions. You can buy them individually, or you can buy them all in a single big box expansion. You can play with all 11 expansions at once. So this game can actually be quite complex if you put every expansion together. This game is good for all occasions. It can be very easy and played very casually, but also this game can be made very cutthroat. And this can be with a few or all the expansions. Doesn't really matter if you're playing with a few or all of them. In both settings, this game can be both simple, but it can also be kind of complex and quite strategic. Depends on who is playing. In addition, it's really easy to learn, so it's easy to onboard people onto this game, and there's great replayability because as these tiles get randomly placed and the map kind of is very dynamic between games, there's a lot of different possibilities and strategies that can be developed as you play. I would consider this game a gateway game, so if you have a lot of friends that really aren't into modern gaming or modern board gaming, this is a really good entryway into that whole genre of games. Moving on to the next game. The next game I love is the king of deck building games called Dominion. Dominion supports 2 to 4 players and can go up to 6 with the expansion, and it has a complexity rating. I would give it about a 3 out of 10. It's quite simple to learn, but really fun. So basically, how this game works is that there are 16 to 18 cards placed in the center of the game. With expansions, the numbers can vary. And people basically take turns around the board seeking to amass the most victory points by playing cards from their hand, buying cards from the center, and drawing new cards. This game is really good, I think, for anybody, but especially if you were to trading card games as a kid. The one attribute I think the Dominion series has over all trading card games that I love is the fact that you don't have to go out and buy 1,000 different packs of cards and all the cards are right in front of you. There's an equal kind of playing ground that everyone is building their decks from. And unlike Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon and other trading card games where you come in with a deck, you kind of build the deck during the game. So it isn't that you kind of pick your X number of cards and that's your deck at once. It's kind of built over time. So people take turns. It feels a lot more equal. And again, you don't have to buy all these different decks of cards. There's no asymmetrical advantages people that have more money have over others. No, but it's just a really fun kind of card game. It is also really good for all occasions. It can get extremely strategic, but it's really easy to teach and can be quite simple at the kind of beginning levels. And there is no game that has more variability than this game. Because as I mentioned, each game features a very standard set of treasure cards and victory cards. As you can see here, there are treasure cards and there are victory cards, but then there are also 10 kingdom cards with each game. And the board game itself comes with 25. So with every game, you pick 10 randomly selected kingdom cards. So that into of itself allows for a lot of variability because the 10 you select will not be the same based on different games. And the 10 you select will also change the strategy. Some cards will be useless in some sets of 10, and those very same cards will be extremely useful in other sets of 10 cards. Also, your strategy might change from a game that's like, for instance, one common strategy is that you want to have a really small hand of powerful actions and just amass victory points that way. But then there's also the bloat deck strategy where you just want to have a very, very big deck because victory points multiply the more cards you have in your deck. And also, if you think about it, with 25 different cards and you pick 10 random cards every time, that's 3.2 million combinations right there. And there are 15 expansions of this. So of those 10 kingdom cards, there could be up to 420 cards that you can choose from. I did the math on this. 4.9 times 10 to the 19 different combinations. So this game is extremely variable. No two games are often the same. And finally, again, I would say just like Carcassonne, this is a gateway game. So if people are kind of new to modern gaming, this would be a good game to kind of get them interested in some of the more complex beasts in gaming. And so the last game that this brings me to is Brass Birmingham. I recently acquired this game and I love it. This game supports 2 to 4 players. Unfortunately, for right now, it doesn't expand beyond that. And I'll give this a complexity rating of about a 6 out of 10. In this game, you play as competing entrepreneurs in the West Midlands during England's Industrial Revolution through establishing transportation, such as canals and rails, as well as building and developing various industries, including finished goods, such as cotton mills, manufactories, and potteries, as well as raw materials industries, such as coal mines, ironworks, and breweries. This game is also extremely thematic. Some of the rules may seem a little bit finicky, but they come together quite nicely in the context of the English Industrial Revolution. For instance, there are 3 different rules that govern how beer, how iron, and how coal work in this game. Those are kind of the 3 resources. With iron, you can use it wherever you are, regardless of transportation. You don't have to be connected to where iron is sourced. And this makes sense in the context of the Industrial Revolution because iron usually wasn't used in large quantities, so it was easy to transport. Whereas coal was used in very large quantities. And so in the game, you're required to be connected to a place that sells coal in order to use it. And then with beer is often needed to make a sale because labor is needed to make sales in this game. And the reason this makes sense is because beer back then was the only way to have clean water, or one of the very few ways to have clean water. Mind you, the alcohol concentration was very small as the main function was just to keep people alive and hydrated. In addition, there is phenomenal artwork in this game. Many of these pieces are double-sided, so players can take their pick on which side they prefer the art of during the game. There's no other functional reason. Who is this game good for? I would say, unlike the other 2 games, this is not a gateway game. I think that if people like the other 2 games, this might be a really good one to progress to just due to the increased complexity of learning it. So I recommend even before you might buy it, maybe check out a video to see whether this might be something for you or this is kind of the complexity you might enjoy. Playtime can be about an hour to 2 hours, especially for newer players. So that's one thing to bear in mind as well, like time-wise. This game makes you think a lot and there's a lot of nuanced player interactions. Helping each other in this game is pretty much inevitable, although you are competing. Unlike some other games that I've played, like Catan, where you can kind of go throughout the game without competing or without kind of trading resources. With this game, it's like you really can survive in this game without helping each other, but you always have to think about how much you're helping and who you're helping. So the player interactions become really quite nuanced and very interactive, which I love. Finally, this game is very replayable because the board game changes drastically depending on what decisions other players make. And it's actually very organic because in other board games, to make each game very different. Oftentimes they will have asymmetrical factions that you can choose to make it so there's variability in the game, or they might do something like having a very modular board that completely changes at the start of each game. For this game, the start of the game is almost always the exact same, but the amount that the board changes based on each player action makes the game extremely variable, and a really fun play where the variability is completely organic and really engaging. All right, and finally, bonus tip as promised. If you are playing board games, one recommendation I have for you or anybody else to feel really immersed in your game is look up a board game playlist specific to the game you're playing. They exist. All right, so let's look up each one of these. So first, let's say we look up Carcassonne soundtrack. And bam, look at that. There's already so many. We see Settlers of Catan music as well. That one's very popular. But yeah, so we have like a very devoted YouTube video. And then let's say that we want to look up Brass Birmingham. Bam, we have one right there. We have a video devoted to it, but we also have very specific playlists that users have added that kind of make thematic sense as well. Thank you, Nathan A. And finally, if we look up Dominion, this one actually might be kind of tough considering that there are 15 expansions. I'm not sure if there is a unifying theme here, so you might, I think with some of these, you may have to do a little bit of deeper searching. Something up here, but I guess with Dominion, you can kind of play something like board game night music. I think in general, having some sort of board game night music can really help with immersion in the gameplay. And for most games that have a pretty unifying theme, that's great. And so kind of like with Brass specifically, I mean, that game, extremely great theme, so it's gonna have a good soundtrack, or appropriate soundtrack, I guess. Anyway, that said, that is everything I wanted to say today. I hope you take these tips and check out these board games and foster that connection with the people you love. All right, I'll talk to you next time. See you later.